You see, when someone wounds you emotionally, psychologically, they don't just walk away with your time or your trust. They walk away with something far deeper. They take pieces of your identity, your confidence, your belief in connection itself. And in that moment, the mind screams for a strategy, something, anything, to regain control. That's where people turn to no contact, a clean break, a desperate attempt to restore power by retreating into silence. But what if I told you silence isn't always strength? What if I told you that sometimes cutting someone off is still a form of emotional reaction, a posture of defense, not of growth? Because here's the hard truth. If you disappear in order to be missed, you're not actually healing. You're still seeking validation. You're still chained to the very person you're trying to escape. The deeper question is this: what does it mean to transcend a situation rather than merely survive it? And that brings us to something most people aren't ready to hear. There exists a strategy far more powerful than no contact. A strategy that doesn't just sever the tie, it reclaims the soul. It doesn't just silence the world, it rebuilds the self. Because real strength isn't found in disappearing, it's found in evolving. And that is what we're going to uncover. Emotional detachment without suppression is not the absence of feeling, it's the conscious mastery of it. It's the art of sitting with your pain, acknowledging its existence, and refusing to let it control your behavior. When a relationship ends or you feel betrayed, the immediate impulse is often to shut down emotionally, to numb the ache by pretending it's not there. That's suppression. That's denial dressed as strength. And while it may feel powerful in the moment, it only delays the inevitable reckoning. The more you suppress, the more power the pain gains in your subconscious. You don't erase pain by pretending it doesn't exist. You bury it alive, and it begins to rot you from within. Detachment, on the other hand, demands something much more difficult. It requires awareness. It demands that you feel everything without allowing those feelings to define who you are or dictate how you act. It's a slow, disciplined separation between stimulus and response. When she ignores you, when she replaces you, when she treats you like you were disposable, you don't react in anger or desperation or grief. You feel all of it, but you do not become it. You observe your mind and you say, yes, this hurts, but I am not this hurt. That is the beginning of true detachment. This form of detachment is rooted in the willingness to suffer consciously, because suffering is inevitable. What matters is how you engage with it. Most people either collapse under it or run from it. Few dare to face it head on, dissect it, and use it as raw material for growth. If you can learn to sit in the middle of your emotional storm and stay grounded, if you can resist the urge to act impulsively, to lash out or chase validation, you begin to develop a kind of psychological armor that can't be faked. And people feel that. They sense when someone has gone through hell and returned without bitterness. That is power. What separates detachment from apathy is intent. Apathy says, I don't care, but it's hollow. It's a mask for someone who cares too much but is too wounded to admit it. Detachment, true detachment says, I care deeply, but I will not lose myself in this. It's not the absence of care, it's the presence of boundaries. And boundaries are the cornerstone of emotional integrity. When you detach properly, you don't need to block someone or beg for attention or craft the perfect revenge. You simply walk away with clarity because their actions no longer determine your state. This is where the strategy becomes more powerful than no contact. No contact is a tactic. Detachment is a transformation. No contact says, I'm going to disappear so you'll miss me. Detachment says, you can miss me or not. I've already reclaimed myself. The former still orbits around the other person. The latter becomes its own center of gravity. You stop trying to win someone back and start trying to win yourself back. And in that shift, everything changes. You stop asking, do they still care? And begin asking, why did I give so much to someone who cared so little? Detachment gives you room to confront uncomfortable truths. It reveals how often we make others responsible for our self-worth, how we allow love to become a transaction of approval. When someone pulls away and you collapse inside, it's not just heartbreak, it's exposure. It shows where you've outsourced your peace to someone else. And that's the real danger, not the loss of a person, but the loss of self that accompanied them. Emotional detachment is the process of reversing that. It is the slow rebuilding of a foundation that does not shake when someone leaves, lies, or betrays. In practicing this, you start to see patterns, not just in others, but in yourself. You see how often you've clung to people who didn't show up. You realize how much energy you've wasted explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. Detachment teaches you to preserve your energy, to walk away without explanation, to outgrow the dynamic rather than win within it. You begin to understand that not all silence is weakness. Some silences are sacred. They are the stillness of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. Eventually, the emotions that once consumed you begin to settle. The intrusive thoughts fade. The emotional triggers lose their charge. You don't forget the pain, but you stop being defined by it. You stop reacting. And that's the key. When you stop reacting, you stop bleeding power. Emotional detachment without suppression allows you to become the observer of your life again, rather than the prisoner of your past. You become someone who feels deeply, but chooses wisely. Someone who loves completely, but never at the cost of self-respect. That, in the end, is not just a strategy, it's a revolution of the soul. Rebuilding identity through voluntary responsibility is one of the most powerful transformations a person can undergo after emotional devastation. When someone leaves, betrays, or devalues you, it doesn't just end a relationship, it fractures the foundation of who you believed you were. You begin to question your worth, your judgment, your ability to love and be loved. In that disoriented state, most people either look outward for rescue or inward with shame, but neither path leads to true recovery. The only road forward is the one where you voluntarily take on the burden of reconstructing your own identity, not as a victim, not as someone abandoned, but as someone reborn through purpose and responsibility. You see, identity is not something phatic. It's not a fixed point you defend. It's a dynamic process you cultivate, and after heartbreak or rejection, it's natural to feel stripped of meaning. But this loss can become sacred. It's the clearing of the old structure, the collapse of illusions that never truly served you. In that raw emptiness lies an opportunity, the chance to build something better, stronger, and more authentic than ever before. And that rebuilding starts with responsibility. Responsibility is not about blame. It's not about saying this was my fault. It's about saying this is my life and I refuse to let someone else's decisions dictate the direction of it any longer. You begin to ask questions most people are too afraid to confront. What part of me tolerated less than I deserved? What did I ignore in myself while trying to meet someone else's needs? What gifts, strengths, or talents have I abandoned because I was so focused on being chosen? When you take responsibility in this way, you stop being reactive, you start becoming deliberate. Every action becomes a conscious choice to realign with who you really are. You don't just fill the silence with distractions. You use the silence to listen. You don't numb the pain. You investigate it, learn from it, and allow it to sharpen your clarity. And through that process, you begin to piece yourself back together, not according to who you were in that relationship, but according to who you were always meant to become. There's a power in setting goals when your heart is broken, not as a distraction, but as a declaration. I'm not done. I'm not broken. I'm just being reshaped. You begin to build your body, not for revenge, but to feel strong again. You educate your mind, not to prove anything, but because you realize knowledge is the foundation of self-respect. You take care of your environment, your finances, your dreams, not because anyone's watching, but because you're watching. That inner witness, the part of you that sees everything, begins to trust you again. And when you trust yourself, no amount of external chaos can destabilize you. Rebuilding identity through responsibility also means confronting your patterns. You stop blaming the other person entirely and start seeing what attracted you to dysfunction in the first place. You realize that growth isn't just about healing the wound. It's about changing the behavior that kept opening you up to the same pain. You may have been addicted to chaos. You may have found comfort in being needed, even when it drained you. You may have equated love with struggle. And now, through responsibility, you learn to tell the truth to yourself and to others. That is the beginning of integrity. Voluntary responsibility gives your life direction. You stop waiting for closure. You stop stalking their social media, wondering if they're happy. You stop comparing yourself to who replaced you, because you've replaced them too with a mission to become so full, so grounded, so complete that no one's presence or absence controls your peace. That is the power of rebuilding. You no longer live to be loved. You live to embody love, truth, and meaning. In the end, this process is not about becoming invulnerable. It's about becoming real. A real man or woman doesn't run from pain. They face it with purpose. They don't collapse when abandoned. They rise with responsibility. And that makes them untouchable. Not because they're cold, but because they're whole. This strategy is deeper than silence, stronger than revenge, and more lasting than validation. It's the quiet power of a person who chose to rise from the ashes of what broke them, not bitter, not hardened, but reborn through responsibility. Transforming pain into strategic focus is not something most people are taught to do. We're conditioned to avoid pain, to distract ourselves, to numb it, to run from it. We medicate it with attention, with noise, with false validation from social media, with cheap dopamine hits, with rebounds, with anything that lets us avoid actually sitting with it. But pain, when approached properly, is not your enemy. It's your teacher. And if you stop resenting it long enough to listen, it will show you exactly who you are, who you were pretending to be, and who you are capable of becoming. After heartbreak, betrayal, or loss, you find yourself in a dark psychological space. Everything feels fragmented. The person you thought you were is gone. The dreams you built with someone else now feel like ghosts. But that space, the void, where it seems like nothing is left, that is where real transformation begins. Most people collapse in that place because they have no inner structure. But if you can withstand the pressure, if you can resist the urge to escape it, that pressure will start forging a new core within you. That is where pain stops being a punishment and starts becoming a blueprint. Strategic focus is not about ignoring the pain, it's about aiming it. Think of it like fire. Left uncontrolled, it burns everything down. But when harnessed, it fuels engines, it forges steel, it creates energy. Emotional pain works the same way. If you wallow in it or try to escape it, it controls you. But if you grab it with both hands and ask, what is this trying to teach me? Then you start moving, you start building, the pain becomes fuel, and it creates momentum that cannot be matched by comfort. You begin to focus not out of spite, but out of clarity. You stop thinking about proving them wrong and start focusing on proving yourself right. You ask yourself, what was I neglecting while I was busy trying to be good enough for someone who couldn't even see me? You start to realize that every ounce of love you gave, every second you invested now belongs to you again. And what you do with that reclaimed energy becomes your power. You no longer give it away blindly. You channel it. You refine it. That's the beginning of strategic focus. It means every action becomes intentional. You get in shape not because you're broken, but because strength becomes sacred. You pursue your craft not because you need applause, but because mastery gives your pain direction. You clean your space, fix your fine. Confront your habits not as distraction, but as transformation. Your days stop being about survival and they become about construction. You're not just trying to get through the week, you're building something, a life, a new self, a fortress that no one can casually enter or exit again. Strategic focus also means you stop reacting. You stop posting things just to get a rise out of them. You stop hoping they'll notice you've moved on. Because at a certain point, you genuinely have. You're too busy growing. You're too busy aligning your life with values instead of validation. The irony is, that's usually when they notice. When you stop caring whether they do. When your presence isn't loud, but your absence is undeniable. The pain, in a way, becomes sacred because it awakens you. It humbles you. It shows you what you tolerated, what you excused, what you chased, and why. It shows you where your standards were low, your boundaries weak, your needs buried. And in that brutal clarity, you gain something rare, vision. You no longer look backward, hoping for a redo. You look forward, determined to never shrink yourself again for love. You realize the goal was never to win them back, it was to never lose yourself again. You begin to understand that peace isn't found in someone else's arms. It's found in your own discipline, in your own structure, in your own capacity to turn even devastation into development. That's when the pain stops owning you. That's when you own it. And that's when it starts to serve you. At the end of the day, the world doesn't reward brokenness, it rewards transformation. And if you can take your pain, extract the wisdom, fuel the discipline, and build the life they never believed you could, then you've done something most people never do. You've turned heartbreak into horsepower. You've turned betrayal into backbone. And you've turned pain, raw, messy, agonizing pain, into purpose, into progress, into focus, so sharp it becomes unstoppable. So much pain into purpose, into focus. So much something imaginable into purpose. Silence is powerful, but distance with purpose is transformative. When someone hurts you, disrespects you, or takes you for granted, your first instinct might be to fall silent. That silence feels like a shield, a refusal to participate in further damage. And it is a shield to some degree. But silence alone is often interpreted as passivity, weakness, or a temporary reaction. Distance with purpose, however, is not passive. It's active. It's deliberate. It sends a message that doesn't just say, I'm gone. It says, I'm moving on with intent. When someone leaves your life or shows you through their actions that they no longer value your presence, the most strategic response is not begging, explaining, or retaliating. The most strategic response is to step away with a purpose, not to teach them a lesson, but to honor yourself, to give yourself the space to realign your life with truth, dignity, and direction. It's not about manipulating their emotions, it's about recalibrating your own identity. And that begins the moment you choose distance, not as a tactic, but as a commitment to yourself. Distance with purpose is not the same as ghosting. It's not about running. It's about stepping back and creating enough space to regain perspective. It's the recognition that proximity often distorts reality. When you're too close to something, especially something toxic, you lose your objectivity. You excuse red flags. You rationalize mistreatment. You shrink your needs. Distance gives you clarity, and with clarity comes strength. This kind of purposeful distance also interrupts patterns. If the dynamic was built on you always reaching out, always fixing things, always making peace, you break that script. You no longer play the role they've written for you, and in doing so, you change the dynamic, not just with them, but with yourself. You start to observe your own emotional responses, your own triggers, your own attachment wounds. You ask deeper questions. Why did I tolerate this? What did I fear would happen if I walked away? What part of me felt unworthy of more? And here's the paradox. The more intentional your distance becomes, the less you think about them. Not because the pain goes away instantly, but because you've shifted the focus. You're not waiting. You're not hoping. You're working. You're healing. You're creating. You're using that space to build, not just externally, but internally. You start rebuilding the inner scaffolding that allowed their presence to mean more than it ever should have. That is the root of purpose. Reclaiming power over the meaning you assign to someone else's behavior. Distance also teaches them something. But again, that's not the goal, it's a byproduct. They start to realize that your silence isn't a tactic, it's a boundary. And boundaries are not walls to punish, they are doors to protect. It shows them that your love was never dependent on them staying, but on you staying true to yourself. That you are not afraid of solitude because you've found meaning in your own company. That your silence is not empty, it's full of movement, full of growth, full of transformation. Purposeful distance also has one more underrated effect. It allows you to see them clearly. From far away, with emotion settled, you see patterns that once seemed invisible. You recognize manipulation where you once saw charm. You see avoidance where you once hoped for change. You understand that your longing for them was not about them, it was about the parts of you that needed healing. Distance reveals truth, and truth sets the foundation for real power. And once you taste that power, you don't go back. Not to old conversations, not to old roles, not to the version of you who tolerated crumbs because you were too afraid to go hungry. You realize that distance with purpose doesn't just create separation, it creates elevation. You rise quietly, steadily, authentically. And the higher you rise, the smaller they become in your rearview mirror, not because they shrank, but because your life expanded. So no, silence is not enough. Silence can be misread. But distance that's filled with transformation, intention, structure, and clarity, that's undeniable. That doesn't beg for attention. That doesn't seek revenge. It simply speaks a truth no argument can touch. You lost access, not because I hate you, but because I finally love myself. That is the ultimate closure, not a text, not a call, not a dramatic confrontation, just your absence, doing the work, creating a life that no longer revolves around someone who couldn't see your worth. Distance with purpose is the loudest statement you'll never need to say out loud. Becoming unforgettable. It's not about playing games, making someone jealous, or carefully crafting the perfect social media post to make them second guess walking away. True unforgettable power emerges when you rebuild yourself so thoroughly, so deeply, that the version of you they once knew becomes unrecognizable. Not because you've changed to win them back, but because you've evolved beyond the need for them at all. They remember who you were, but they'll never have access to who you've become. That is where the real power lies. After someone leaves, especially when you've been replaced or devalued, the temptation is strong to seek validation, to prove your worth to them, to show them what they lost. But if that becomes your motivation, then they still control you. They still dictate the terms of your transformation. Instead, becoming unforgettable means detaching from that desire altogether. It means transforming not for them to notice, but so you can rise. Because the moment you stop orbiting their perception, you begin radiating your own. They won't forget you, not because you're haunting their thoughts, but because your growth creates contrast. They remember the old you, the one who tolerated too much, gave too freely, hoped too deeply. But now, you're someone else. Now you move differently. You carry yourself with clarity. You speak with precision. You protect your time, your energy, and your emotional availability. You're no longer performing for approval. You're living in alignment. That contrast hits them harder than any message you could ever send. Most people go back to the same cycles. They change just enough to mask the wound, but not enough to truly heal it. But the person who becomes unforgettable is the one who confronts the wound, studies it, dissects it, and builds something solid in its place. That person doesn't just bounce back, they reconstruct from the ground up. They no longer accept less because they've come to understand their value isn't up for negotiation. The most unforgettable people are those who develop discipline in the quiet. While others are chasing attention, they're cultivating strength. While others are reacting emotionally, they're moving with calm intention. They're not desperate for closure, they are the closure. Their life becomes the proof that they never needed to be chosen to be whole. And the irony is, that wholeness is exactly what haunts the one who took them for granted. It's not just that you're gone, it's that you thrived without them. You stop needing to remind them of who you are because your presence becomes so grounded, so self-sufficient, that they can't help but feel the void. But by then, it's too late. You don't need to be remembered as the one who begged, who cried, who broke. You become remembered as the one who leveled up, who disappeared into self-mastery and re-emerged untouchable. That's unforgettable because it forces them to confront their own lack of growth. And people rarely forget the ones who reflect back the depth of their own mediocrity. It's important to note, this is not about pride or ego. It's not about revenge or superiority. It's about returning to your center. It's about understanding that being unforgettable is not something you perform. It's something you become by aligning your actions, your boundaries, and your identity with who you truly are beneath the pain. You don't chase closure. You create distance. You don't explain your worth. You embody it. The people who hurt you, replaced you, or ignored your value will always be confused by your silence, but they will be haunted by your evolution. Because growth, true, undeniable growth, has a language that doesn't beg to be understood. It just exists. It breathes in the way you carry yourself. It echoes in the things you no longer tolerate. It lives in the peace you now require. So if you want to become unforgettable, don't focus on being seen. Focus on becoming someone you never forget, someone who stood in the ashes of heartbreak and didn't just survive, but built an empire. Someone who let the pain refine, not define them. Someone who walked away not because they were bitter, but because they were finally done betraying themselves. That is the kind of power that lingers, not in their inbox, not in their feed, but in their memory. Quiet, unshakable, permanent. You've now seen it clearly. What lies beneath the surface when someone pulls away? When their words say one thing, but their actions whisper betrayal. These are not just random signals or innocent mistakes. They're patterns, precise, psychological shifts that unfold when someone is hiding another man. But this speech was never just about identifying her. It was about rediscovering you. Because in the chaos of doubt, deception, and emotional disorientation, the most powerful move you can make isn't confrontation, it's transformation. You don't heal by chasing truth from someone who's already rewritten it to suit their comfort. You heal by standing still long enough to see what you've tolerated, what you've ignored, and what you need to confront inside yourself. When a woman hides another man, It's not just her dishonesty that matters. It's your clarity that becomes critical. Your ability to notice the signs, to step back, and to stop begging for crumbs of honesty. This isn't about hatred, revenge, or retaliation. It's about reclaiming your emotional sovereignty. And here's the truth that bites the hardest. If you allow yourself to be disrespected once, you become a participant in your own pain. That's where the deeper shift must happen. Not in her behavior, but in your boundaries. This speech is your wake-up call to stop romanticizing the one who's erasing you behind closed doors, to stop grieving a fantasy, to stop hoping for closure from someone who was careless with your heart. You don't need her explanation. You need your evolution. Let her go. Let her hide. Let her be everything she chose to become in your absence. But you rise quietly, purposefully, ruthlessly focused on becoming a man who no longer needs to decode betrayal because he's mastered the art of walking away from it the first time. Remember, the most dangerous man is the one who's been hurt, humbled, and healed. And when you become him, you never get played again.